The last decade or so has really brought in a lot of heightened interest in ideology, okay? Some of that is contingent on some seminal research that came out on Congress that used a, pretty sophisticated methodology to measure ideology in an unbiased way in Congress. And what that found was that since the 1960s, we've had Congress become much more ideological. And a lot of the moderates in Congress have disappeared and been replaced by more ideological members for both the left and the right, but particularly pronounced polarization on the political right in Congress. So, that led to questions about polarization, ideological polarization amongst other groups. And one of those groups is voters, right? So we've been looking at my research and others of ideological preferences of the electorate and how that's changed over time. And what we've generally found is that there was a period in American development after the Civil Rights Acts of the 1960s, which sparked off what we call the Dixiecrat Revolution. And that really was, the upheaval of the Democratic Party coalition that had existed and really reigned supreme in American politics from the Great Depression into the 1960s. But that had been maintained by what we call kind of an unholy alliance between liberal Democrats in the North and Southern conservative Democrats, right? And the alliance had been maintained as long as liberal Northerners kind of looked away from segregation in the South. And that came to an end with the Johnson administration and the Civil Rights Acts of the 1960s. And once that happened, that really fractured that coalition. And what we saw over a long period of time was the erosion of the Democratic Party in the South, from party switching, from generational replacement. It's not to say that the segregationists merely switched to the Republican Party, but the Democratic brand of liberalism became really damaged with that movement. And over time, what you see in American politics is what we call party sorting. We see ideological liberals sorting into the Democratic Party. We see ideological conservatives sorting into the Republican Party. And so that over time, pretty much if I know nothing about you except for that you're liberal, you're a Democrat, or you're conservative, you're a Republican. And my research argues that once we hit that point, then we start to have homogeneity in those ideological camps. And that's when you really start to see the spreading out and the movement to the extremes of the ideology scale. Yeah, so in general, what we think of, though, are very different things. So with the Democrats, it really is what we call group interest fragmentation. So like, as you just pointed out, the labor union Democrats versus the pro-business Democrats versus the environmental Democrats, which, may conflict with both of those other groups. But it really is, you've got, gay Americans, you've got minority, you've got a very, very heterogeneous coalition. And it really is motivated by what we call group interest. In the Republican coalition of the modern day, what we're looking at is a lot of homogeneity. Primarily white voters, primarily religious voters, almost all white rural voters are Republican now. So, with that, it really is more of an ideological fragmentation between moderates, social conservatives, business conservatives, and even libertarian conservatives. And, that's what we see. That's, I think, one of the reasons we see what we call asymmetric polarization. So polarization being more pronounced in that Republican bloc than it is in the Democratic bloc. One of the research projects I'm debating post-election is, is Trump really a product of ideological polarization? Because here we have a situation where, the partisan stakes have become so high and the distinctions between the parties so clear. And, with the convergence of all this partisan media and even fake media coming out, I feel like, okay, here we have a candidate, the American electorate has chosen a candidate that even his own supporters by and large identify as behaviorally and, character wise unfit for the office that he's going to hold, okay? Right. But they voted for him anyway, and in data they're citing, the importance of control of the Supreme Court, or, the ability to modify the tax code. They're citing partisan reasons to justify what really, I don't think any other time in history the American electorate would have picked somebody like Donald Trump to be the president. I mean, in other time periods when somebody who's been problematic has run, they've been shellacked, right? And in this case, I feel like the Trump victory is a product of this ideological warfare, and it led many Republican voters that should and probably do know better, in my opinion, as far as his temperament and abilities go, to vote for him because of that partisan consideration. Definitely the worst byproduct of where we're at, right? I mean, we've never been, the system of government that the framers put in place, the separation of power system and the checks and balances, is not functioning as it should be functioning. And to be fair to the framers, they always saw parties and factionalism as a possible grind in the gear, right? Yeah. But ultimately, with the separation of power system, and most Americans unfortunately don't really understand exactly how the mechanics of that operate, like compromise, the ability to compromise between these factions, in this case the parties, is key. It's literally the grease that makes the wheels turn, right? And without that grease and the wheels turning, then you're right, we have policy gridlock. So to bring that full circle, the electorate has chosen a candidate who, for better or for worse, has qualification and temperamental issues, right? But, ironically, is not particularly ideological, right? I mean, here's a guy who is arguing both big government and small government proposals. I mean, he gave a speech yesterday in North Carolina in which he argued that we should further expand the size and scope of the military, which is still dramatically more robust than any other nation on earth, or even a combination of them, but then went on to give an isolationist, policy appeal. So it's like, it's very interesting when we have entered a time period where, we could see, some of these policies come to fruition. I mean, if Donald Trump was to do everything that he wanted to achieve on the campaign trail, you would see, obviously more victories for the political right than the left, but you would see victories for the political left, especially the far left, in terms of the trade deals and, other things. So it certainly is almost an irony, right, that this ideological gridlock and warfare may have produced one of the least ideological presidents that we've had in the modern era. It's not the message, it's the messenger, right? So a great example of that would be Ivanka Trump's speech at the RNC. That was a moment for me to hear her advocating for basically the expansion of the federal government to mandate paid maternity leave to a Republican audience, and to hear them cheer it, right? I mean, that was really something. It really shows that, there is an opportunity in this for, Trump to do things that a Democratic president would never be able to sell. And so, it'll be interesting to see where this goes.